social media. So if you're into the local news and sports, follow us at WTKR.com. And, lucky to be here with Jesse today and fellow worker over at the station. So it's been good so far. Excited to talk some sports.
It's always good to talk sports, man. But it is really, really hot in the studio right now. I'm sweating right now.
We're losing a little weight, New Year's resolutions.
I've already broken a lot of my resolutions already. That's just kind of how it goes with New Year's resolutions. Let's dive into the Hall of Fame a little bit. When it comes to Bonds and Clemens, these are two guys that were Hall of Famers at their positions before the whole PED thing came up. Bonds, these are two guys, correct me if I'm wrong, neither one of them ever tested positive. Bonds self-admitted. Bonds never admitted.
McGuire self-admitted.
And A-Rod did as well. It is really hot in here. I'm sweating profusely. I'm gonna stop being nervous here and stop saying the word But anyways, Clemens was destined for the Hall of Fame before he opened his mouth up. There was a big controversy with the trainer, and the guy was training his wife, and his wife was getting jacked, so everyone was coming after Clemens for her. We had that big congressional hearing, and Clemens was on Capitol Hill. It just turned into be a big mess. The steroid era in baseball, it's kind of a double-edged sword here. It kind of meant a lot for the sport of baseball, because if you look at the guys who juiced, if you look at Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa is a guy who's never tested positive. He's just turned into a Mack truck during his entire career. He's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. But if it wasn't for their home run chase in the late 90s, baseball was dead after that strike. No one was going to the ballparks. No one was watching the games. Baseball looked like it was dead to rights. Then all of a sudden we had that summer and that home run chase, and everybody was just glued to the TV just watching McGwire just jacks balls 530 feet, just out of ballpark. Sosa doing the same thing, going after Maris's record. It did something great for the sport of baseball. And guys like that, I do believe, need to be in the Hall of Fame, but maybe even you give them their own wing. Call it the asterisk swing. I don't care what you call it. It needs to be a part of the history of the game, because how many guys are in the Hall of Fame that have done PEDs that are already in there before PEDs were really a thing in the 90s, before they started really testing for them?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic to discuss, putting a different wing there for players in the 90s and early 2000s that used steroids. But my whole thing is that, when you talk about an era of baseball and of the sport and its popularity and its heyday of those early 2000s, late 90s, of right then and there, like you said, coming off of the strike, how many percentage of those players were using steroids? And I think that's what it comes down to me when I look at should some of these players get in? And you talked about it too, Clemens, Bonds, they were both Hall of Famers before they even, Bonds was a Hall of Famer before he even went to San Francisco. Clemens had a whole great career from start to finish. Some of these guys, though, their whole career was entrenched in this steroid era. So, what if they're 17 years old starting off in baseball, and some kids giving them or some older guys, some vets giving them steroids, and they're hooked for the rest of their career, and all they see is, people, popping pills, shooting up, steroids, their whole career. How are they supposed to go at the end of it? They're trying to get in the Hall of Fame, and you've done this whole career of them not being able to get in. And I understand that there are people out there that have been like, no, I didn't use steroids. I did it the right way. I did it clean. But you hear about these stories of, a jar of pill in a locker room of a baseball, baseball clubhouse, and there's steroids. These kids, this is something that was so rampant at that time. How do you leave out some of these best players? Now, I don't think it's going to happen in the next 10 years that we're going to let these guys in, but I do think at some point there's going to become some rationalization, and maybe that takes new Baseball Writers Association.
That's what it is. I think it's going to take some of these younger baseball writers, some of the guys that are coming in now, and some of the older guys that are leaving, guys like that are our age, that are coming into the job and they're getting those Hall of Fame votes, guys that grew up watching Clemens and Bonds and Sosa and McGwire. And then the big thing that's coming up next is going to be A-Rod.
Yeah.
And A-Rod was, he's generationally one of the greatest baseball players. He was a fantastic shortstop. Guy was a power hitter. He was 5-tool everywhere. And here's something about A-Rod, too. During his playing career, not a lot of people liked him. No. He was suspended for an entire season. He self-admitted using PEDs. I mean,
he is a great analyst, though.
Yeah. Well, that's the next point I was going to get to. If there's one person in the entire sports who's cleaned up his image since his playing days, it's A-Rod. And that's from him getting into the booth and him showing some humility and him getting humbleized by – because I'm sure he's in the press box with a lot of these older baseball writers. I'm sure he doesn't care a lot what they think. But I don't know, a guy like A-Rod, he may. And he may want to make amends with some of these guys. And if anything, his broadcasting career has become like a PR tour. Because he knows he's going to be up for the Hall of Fame, I don't think next year, but like the year after that, or maybe even the year after that. And he knows he's not getting in first ballot. He would get in first ballot if none of the PED stuff happened. But maybe he'll get a couple more votes than he thought he was going to get. Like Bonds and Clemens got to almost a 60% threshold. I think you need 70 to get in. So they're getting closer and closer. They may not get in by the writers. They may get in through like the Veterans Committee. But like I said, a guy like A-Rod is just it's going to be interesting to see what happens, to see what the spin doctors say, and see what they think when he's up for the Hall. Because I think he is going to get more votes than guys like Bonds and Clemens and McGuire and even Rafael Palmeiro's gotten. Because I think there are going to be some baseball writers that want to put A-Rod into the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I also know there's going to be some baseball writers that are going to go against the grain.
Yeah, and my whole thing with A-Rod is that if you talk about the players we talked about, previously for him, you talk about Bonds, you talk about Sosa, you talk about McGuire, you talk about Clemens, they played a majority of the 90s into the 2000s. A-Rod's a little bit younger than them, so he I feel like had a little bit more of a chance to be like, I don't need to use these. I can go without using these. The ladder of his career, and there were a couple times where he got popped for using things. It wasn't just one time. And so A-Rod's a little different from me, but I do think he's worth it when it comes to getting in. Like, I do think that you can lump him in there. He's one of the best players that ever played the game. And, for a lot of them, if I was and I'll be honest, I didn't play D1 football, but I did, I played a little college football, and I never did steroids. But I will say this, if it's a second between me getting from, college to professional sports to play, it'd be hard not to take something like that. So, I look at all these guys, and if you're 18 going into baseball, and, most people around you are doing steroids, and this is for a couple decades, what are we talking about? And, and baseball is a weird sport. There's a lot of unwritten rules in baseball. There's a lot of
too many unwritten rules.
And by unwritten rules, I'm talking about cheating and curving the sport. When you talk about pitchers putting stuff on the ball, you talk about some of these weird things that people have done. I mean, so
pine tar incidents.
There are multiple things where baseball is just that kind of. It's a shady sport in ways. I love the sport and I always will, but the steroid era, there's gonna have to be some rectifying between that because I'm a proponent when it comes to the Hall of Fame, and this is from steroids to Pete Rose to Shoeless Joe Jackson. If you've had issues, that's one thing, but if the players in that era were better than those, and that's what it is with steroids. That's one thing, and then, with Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson, they had other issues, but that was outside the sport. So, Pete Rose did do batting, so that's one thing. But
that's another thing too. With Pete Rose, you could put him in as a player.
Yeah, and he never gambled. He never gambled against his own team.
Yeah, and he never gambled when he was a player. I mean, that's what he claims he did, but he claims he's admitted, he gambled when he was a manager, and yes, he never gambled against his own team. And when you're talking about Bonds and Clemens and A-Rod, Pete Rose always comes up too because Pete Rose is at least go in the Hall of Fame as a player.
He's one of the most pure hitters in the game.
He's still the all-time hits leader.
Yeah.
I mean, and the entire sport of the history of baseball is Ichiro, but remember, Ichiro didn't come to Major League Baseball until his mid to late 20s. So the all-time hits leader in Major League Baseball is still Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose himself. I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. He's done the PR stuff. He's done the tours. He's done the meetings. He's tried everything he can.
Except for quitting gambling.
But
hey, we talk about addiction in this country. We talk about the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
Gambling's an addiction. So I mean, like, for Pete Rose, that's something that's very hard for him, and it's
He lives in Vegas.
Yeah,
He helped himself out.
No, he is not, and when he had that, and I think it was a few years ago, he met with the commissioner of baseball and straight up told him, "No, I'm not. I haven't stopped betting and gambling." So I mean, he just since has not helped himself, and I do think with Pete Rose, away from the steroid part of it, if Pete Rose in the 80s when this came out, or I believe it was the 80s when this came out, if he would have then admitted to this, I feel like Pete Rose would now be in the Hall of Fame. I think there's just this prolonged of we know what you did, and you just can't admit it. That's really irked a lot of people.
Well,
in baseball.
Pete Rose was once quoted saying that if I beat my wife, I would have been in the Hall of Fame, but I gambled on baseball, and I'm not in the Hall of Fame. So baseball, like you're talking about the unwritten rules, and it's the same thing with the writers, and that's why I think the writers are out of touch. Mostly the older writers are out of touch with the sport. Baseball just gets in its own way too much. They talk about they want the game to grow, they want the game to change. Like attendance was at a record low this year around stadiums all around. Ratings were down. Ratings were down for the World Series. Baseball, it needs to grow, it needs to develop, but it won't because it's just the old mentality, the unwritten rules, just keep it from growing. And they refuse to grow any of their young stars. They refuse to market the Bryce Harpers and the Mike Trouts. I mean, you got Mike Trout, who's slowly becoming one of this generation's greatest players. I probably watched Mike Trout play maybe 3 games last year because he was either on Sunday Night Baseball where he was playing against the Orioles, and I stopped watching the Orioles in like May. So,
I mean, I think when it comes to like baseball, it's a sport that 50 years ago, I think was more relatable to the times, and also 50 so years ago when it was at its heyday. When we're talking about baseball in general. Some of these other leagues, the NFL, the NBA, they were just established not too long ago. Major League Baseball's been around for a while, like almost a century, if not more than that already. So, it with just the demand of other sports, it has not grown as much. And then you talk about the paceness. America certainly in itself has gone towards more fast-paced content and exposure. Baseball's not the most fast-paced sport, and it's always had issues with that. So I think that's what the issue with baseball is. And for the longest time, I feel like baseball's been like, well, we're baseball. We'll do our thing. And they haven't gone a little bit, like you said, market their players in certain ways. And, it's hard when, there aren't tons of great stars in and out every year that you can just name off the top of your head in baseball. I mean, there are some, but you just, that's the one sport.
Well, it's really the only baseball purists that know about those guys. I mean, baseball, it's become sort of a regional sport. Like if you look, a lot of the times the only times you can watch your baseball team, say I'm a Mariners fan, I live on the East Coast. Well, the only way I can watch them is if I have Fox Sports Pacific Northwest. Like I'm not going to be able to watch them on MASN here on the East Coast because it's the Nationals and the Orioles.
And I also think it doesn't help with baseball that you start off your season, at the end of the NHL playoffs. Or going into the NHL playoffs, going into the end of the NBA season, and then you finish your season going into the middle of college football, the middle of NFL football. So, it's just like the meat of you're going to watch baseball is in the dead of summer, during vacation time, during the dog days of the summer. So, it's just, the schedule within itself is crazy. And I do think also there needs to be maybe cutting down on the season a little bit, and I'm not the biggest proponent of how many games are played either.
I've always been a big opponent too of how long the baseball season is. To me, baseball season should be done by Labor Day, because once the NFL season starts going, a lot of people, I mean, including myself, sometimes I lose track of baseball. Once the Thursday night games start going, and Sundays, and even like the college football season, I lose track that the Orioles are playing like a 3:40 Saturday afternoon game because by that time I'm watching SEC football.
Exactly.
I'm watching the SEC game of the week, and that early in the season, it's usually a top 5 matchup. It's like LSU versus Alabama or something like that.
Yeah, and when you play like 172 games, is that it?
162.
162 games. When you've done a few months of that, and then you go and you have 4 games with the same team back to back, I'm losing interest past game 2 of that 4-game stint. And it's just, and even if I care past the first game, because I can just look it up in 3 days and see where you're at. And I think that's the issue. When you talk about the playoffs, baseball does itself disjustice by how many games are leading into it, and it always has felt like the last month of the regular season of baseball, while it matters a lot, you're dragging through it.
And I will say the playoffs can be a lot of fun to watch.
Oh my
there is
gosh,
nothing like playoff baseball.
Love it.
But can you imagine if they stopped at Labor Day and then used the first couple weeks of September? You could have the World Series done by the end of September instead of the World Series being played into like Halloween in early November.
And I think that's the issue, is that like either cut back on the amount of games you have during the regular season or extend the playoffs a little bit, so that that's just the better part. And they're not going to be, they wouldn't be the only ones to do that. I mean, the NFL, NBA, I mean, like look how big their playoffs is and how long that takes. I think you'd make it a little bit more interesting on that route if you didn't want to cut down on so many games. Well, make a larger playoff so you can have more teams in it, so that you are still making that money on that end of it. I mean, and the reality is that is part of it, is that they play so many games because they have to, I feel like, financially make that money for what, running the stadium, things like that. That probably plays into it to a certain extent.
I don't want to spend the whole time talking about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Some really great points that Nick brought up. That was a good conversation, man.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm battling a little bit of a cold there.
I will say this. I think I've already lost 5 pounds already in the studio.
I know, just sweating in here, man. Like, I'm going to have to change shirts after this because I am, like, soaked.
It's the best workout I've had all week.
Well, yeah, same here. I got to say, next year, Jeets is going to be up for the Hall of Fame, and he's a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. Does he go the route that the Rivera went and be unanimous? I don't think so. Only because guys ahead of him, like Cal Ripken Jr. and Ozzie Smith, they didn't get all the votes to go in first ballot as well. And
they were better players.
They were better players than Jeets. Jeets is probably one of the greatest Yankees of all time. Not one of the great. Is he a top 10 shortstop of all time? Yes. Is he a leader? Yes. Is he one of the greatest of all time?
No.
I mean, he's one of the greatest Yankees of all time.
When you think about some of the top players just known in the sport, Jeter's in the top 10.
Yeah,
but talent-wise, he was just Mr. Consistency his whole entire career.
I mean, his career batting average was what, like 310 or something like that. That's like Mr. Consistency.
And there's nothing to frown upon on that. It's just the reality of the fact is that there are better players than him. So, like, and I will say this: as much as the baseball writers in America get, some crap for stuff, I do think it's great that the only person that got unanimous is Mario Rivera, and he is the best. There's no one that can argue that he is not the best closer of his generation or all time.
I want to get into something of that in a second, but also with Jeets, he's in the Hall of Fame of girlfriends too.
Oh, yeah.
And then the guy's starting lineup is, top of his wife now. Who did he date? What, Mariah Carey,
Cameron
Diaz. Name a Victoria's Secret model. We hated her.
I thought I either read or heard this somewhere, maybe on a sports show, that like, if someone was leaving his apartment, that they'd have like a bag to go.
Yeah, no, I read that
like
too.
A gift bag to go.
Yeah, no, Jeets. That's what I read that too. He would have a car service ready for the girl, and inside the car would be a gift basket, which include autographed baseballs from Derek Jeter. Like, if that isn't the all-time Hall of Fame move right there, you should go to the Hall of Fame for the gift baskets alone.
I wonder if we can get one of those gift baskets and enshrine it in the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, then you find one of the girlfriends or one of the ladies he brought home, and like she can donate the gift basket to the Hall of Fame.
What does he give someone he actually likes though? Like just a.
Well, he's married now,
yeah.
So I don't know, a ring, I guess. Hold on, yeah. They even did. There's even like a top, like a starting lineup of Derek Jeter's girlfriends. I mean, Jessica Alba's on here.
I forgot about her. She's good.
Scarlett Johansson, Adriana Lima, Jessica Biel, Jordana Brewster.
Talk about a dream team right there.
Mika Kelly, Tyra. He dated Tyra Banks. I didn't know. Like I knew Chris Webber dated Tyra Banks for a while.
Proud of him.
I didn't know
Proud of him.
So, anyways, we'll stop talking about Jeets' girlfriends because I think I just turned every lady in my audience, which is probably just one or two, and it's probably my girlfriend, off from the show. So, talking about Rivera being one of the greatest closers of all time, I wanted to segue into that and just talk about athletes who've just dominated their positions, like some of the greatest athletes of all time at their positions. And some of the guys I can think off the top of my head, you go to the NHL and you think about goaltending, the first thing you think of is Patrick Waugh. One of those dominant goalies of all time, multiple Stanley Cup winner, multiple Vezina winner, Hall of Famer. Is there anything you can think off the top of your head?
I mean, I think we're in a couple weeks we're going to see one of them playing the Super Bowl. Tom Brady at quarterback.
Tom Brady.
Yeah. Gretzky. I think without a doubt.
Yep. Great one.
I mean, if we're going to stay on hockey, Gordie Howe.
Gordie Howe. Yeah, because Gretz was a centerman and Howe was a winger. So.
I'm just impressed for how long he played. When you can go play professional hockey with your kids, and if anyone doesn't know who Gordie Howe is, he played one of the most legendary hockey players, I think, with Blackhawks. He played for a long time.
Wings,
yeah. He also ended up at the end of his career played so long
for the Oilers at the end of
and played with his kids. Played with both his sons at one point.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, you know, he was impressive.
Tiger Woods?
Tiger Woods, yeah.
Tiger Woods. I mean, watching Tiger in the early 2000s was...
Think he's going to get one this year? Masters?
Well, and that's another thing. Tiger
I waited every Sunday to write a story about how he won, and it just never happened.
Oh, my man Brady back home said, Hulk Hogan. Yeah, Hulk Hogan. Yeah.
Respectable. No, respectable.
Actually, I'm going to check it because, wait a minute, Tiger made his season debut today at the Farmers.
That's one out in San Diego? Isn't it?
Yeah, the first round is still in progress right now.
Where are they playing?
I believe, the Farmers, I think, is in San Diego. Because they'll be at Pebble Beach after the Super Bowl. Jordan Spieth's at 400 right now. I don't see Tiger on the board yet.
Speaking of golf,
what's that?
The Ryder Cup was one of the most embarrassing things for me this year.
You know what? Nick's a big golfer.
I am a big golfer.
This is Nick's first time on the show. Nick, take the floor. I got some more stuff we're going to talk about here in a minute, but I'm going to let
I'll make it short. So my issue...
If you guys know me, I like rants on sports shows, so I'm going to let Nick...
My issue with golf is how the Ryder Cup went down in France. Number one, we have some of the greatest golfers on the American side. You talk about Spieth, you talk about...
Justin Thomas.
Who's the one that ran the Masters?
Dustin Johnson.
Dustin Johnson was on the team. Patrick Reed. You talk about all these guys. These are the youngest players in the game, and they're some of the best. And you're over there. We blow the Masters, or excuse me, not the Masters. We blow the Ryder Cup, and then when it comes out that like there's such a gripe fest between all these players, that was one of the worst things because I love competition and I love golf. And I love being able to root for America and all those three things they get to do in the Ryder Cup. And then the end of it, not only did they lose, you hear a week later in stories reported that they just hate each other. Some of these guys hate each other.
Well, a lot of it's Patrick Reed. There's not a single player on the tour that likes Patrick Reed.
Patrick Reed is, and I feel bad for him in some way, and part of me is just like, this guy is interesting. Because, like, I mean, you talk about, he won in Augusta. It's one of the top four, but in my personal opinion, the best major you can win.
Oh, it's the Masters. Oh,
Masters.
Yeah, there's nothing. Like, I hate how the Masters is like at that perfect springtime that it's a Sunday you want to be out and about, but you don't want to miss Sunday at Augusta.
And Patrick Reed's one of these guys who he has been disliked his whole career, and that's carried over from college where they didn't like him, and where he
voted off
essentially he cheated, maybe, and or that was reported, and then you go over here and he's not even liked in the PGA Tour now. I don't know, maybe that came over. There's stuff with his family, not talk to him, but he doesn't want to talk to his family.
Well, he's from Augusta, and he went to Augusta State after he was kicked out of Georgia. I don't know if he got kicked out or left, but I know he was voted off the golf team. They didn't want him on the team anymore. And then his parents are watching the Masters when he did not invite them. He didn't give them tickets. They're watching it in their backyard. They're watching their son win, and they're crying because they can't be there with him.
And you know what? I'm not going to hold the family thing against him. Like, I mean, we look at Aaron Rodgers goes through family stuff that was sprawled out with his brother talking on the Bachelorette. So, like, we don't know what goes on between families, and I don't hold that against him. But it's not that one thing when it comes to Patrick Reed. And some of these golfers, I think they need to take a chapter out of their book from when it comes to Tiger and Phil Mickelson and how they act now, and realize that hey, maybe this is how we need to do our career. Or we're not going to win a Ryder Cup, and we're not going to win every year.
Well, remember, it took a really big incident to give Tiger some humility, because I heard he was a pain to deal with on the tour before all that happened.
Yeah, and I mean,
but it comes with the territory. He's one of the greatest, most dominant golfers of all time. I mean, it's going to come with the territory a little bit. You're going to be a little cocky. You're going to be a little arrogant, and you hear that a lot about pro golfers. The same thing that happened with Phil Mickelson. Phil. Not a lot of people like Phil early in his career because he was too cocky and he was too arrogant, and it took him to have a family for him to settle down a little bit. And a lot of these, it happened to Anthony Kim. Anthony Kim was the next big superstar in golf, but he couldn't get out of his own damn way. He ended up flaming out.
Yeah, I mean Anthony Kim, that's a tragic story because we talk about good-looking kid, young,
great game, great game.
You know, I mean, Asian American. You talk about expanding the sport in a way that you want to in this country.
A Tiger Woods type, you know, someone,
that you can like rally behind.
I think he was a national champion in college.
Yeah,
he's a great golfer.
And like you said, he's burned out. But I do love golf for the fact that there are so many young players that are good. You know, these guys are entertaining to watch, but. My whole gripe is just with the Ryder Cup, and that and it's not good for the sport when you have all these young players and they're not getting along to a certain extent. Like I think Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth are the only two that truly are friends out there. Yeah, and you don't have to be buddy, but you know at least respect each other and be able to like.
A lot of people don't like Bubba Watson.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
He's another guy a lot of people on the tour don't like.
Yeah.
I'll have to have you back on before the Masters. We'll do a big Masters preview because I love watching the Masters. All right, let's transition into the NFL a little bit. Wow, what a Sunday last Sunday. I know the game's like 4 days old, but listen, I only get on the air once a week and it's on Thursday, so it's my show. I'm going to talk about something that's 4 days old. But what a fantastic Sunday of football. I was actually, Nick and I were watching it together at a friend's house with a couple buddies.
Had some good food that day, too.
Some great food that day. Oh, man, I can't wait for the Super Bowl. You coming to my Super Bowl party?
I'll come, man.
I might have to open it up to listeners, all five.
I have to be at work at 4 a.m., so it's going to be
Sam, I'm going to be at work with you. That's the best thing about the Super Bowl. It starts at 6:30. It's done by like 9:30. So
good.
What I don't know what more can be said that's already I don't know what more we can say that's already been said here. Wow, the Saints that sucks. I mean that for just to have the game right there at your grasp, to just know you're about to go to the Super Bowl, and it wasn't even a call. It was such a blatant non-call. Just takes all the winds out of your sails.
Yeah.
All right, I got a great pick with this kid here in a minute. I'd flip you off, but the camera's on right now. Anyways, I'm getting taunted right now about the freaking Islanders being in first place in the Metro. God, Islanders, man. Anyways, back to the NFL. I don't want to talk about the Caps right now. We freaking lost 8 in a row, including last night losing the Leafs, giving up 12 goals in 2 games. Anyways, I'm gonna get mad here. NFL. Saints. That's terrible. But here's what you had. You got the ball to start overtime. You had a chance to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, my whole and just refresh, you know, that play first down going in and the no call and the pass interference, you know, against the Rams. My whole thing with that is, like you said, you know, you got the ball to start overtime. You know, Drew Brees throws let's be honest, a terrible pass when getting hit. And
he should have just took the sack on that play. He lobs it up. Just take the sack, bro.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, there are times Drew Brees has some gunslinger in him that, you know,
he's a lot of Brett Favre.
Yeah, he does a little bit, and you know that's the issue. And my biggest issue right now is just how it's being handled. You know, what should be done to not have this happen?
That's the big discussion we want to get into. Because I don't want to keep recapping the game. Because we got a Super Bowl now, a Super Bowl that a whole lot of people really didn't want to see. But we've got it, and we're going to watch it because the Super Bowl is like always the most watched thing ever on TV.
Heck yeah, Maroon 5. Can't wait.
Oh, yeah.
Halftime.
No, that's what I'm watching for Maroon 5. But, yeah, now the big discussion is what can be done to prevent this from happening again?
So a lot of people have been like, you know, we need to be able to have – because New York has their own little box, their own little room where they're watching all this, and they can go back and forth and, you know, do what they need to, you know, make a call right. And they're talking about trying to put rules in place where, you know – New York City can call down to these refs at games all across the country, be like, hey, that's actually pass interference. We reviewed it. We're going to call that.
Well, they do that in the NHL. The NHL has they have a huge, it's in Toronto where the league offices are, and they watch every goal.
Yeah.
And they watch just about every penalty, and they call down to the boxes first, and they call down to the refs before anything is called. I don't see why the NFL can't have that. Have an eye in the sky, like, hey, we just caught this. This is a blatant. You don't need to do it, like you said, for every penalty and every touchdown. But for a blatant call like that even your most normal viewer, even like some of the people we were watching the game with who aren't even really fans of the game, even said that was BS.
Yeah, and I think part of it, I don't like that for the fact of, I have a different view of it for the fact of I don't think that it's great to have all your plays and penalties called from out. You have those refs for a reason, and I do think football is that one sport that's so polarizing. These players are playing so fast, things are going so instant.
Everything's so emotional.
Yeah, and I heard the other day a great one would be that maybe if there's a microphone going to the earpiece of this umpire, that up there they'd be like, hey, maybe you guys get together and make this call.
Call like a referee timeout.
Yeah, a referee timeout, and y'all get together and make this call, and then someone up there in the office in New York can just be like, hey, you guys need to look at this because this is what happened. And then they can make a determination there. I think that what I get frustrated about in football, and this is something that has started to really mess me up, is the time of play and how long it's taking. I mean, that's why a lot of people don't want a replay like that, because with replays and commercials and media timeouts. You want to talk about a sport that's been affected so much by this pace of play? Look at baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying football is going to turn into baseball and that so just the pace of play. I mean, it's just different. But when we're there talking about a millisecond, every time someone's going in for a run on a touchdown because they put the ball across, and we need to look at it like 5 different angles, and this is starting to be something that's just dragging on and on and on. Like I think not trusting your refs and not trusting what's been in place forever. There's always going to be calls that aren't called. Refs are not perfect. There's a human element to
error.
this.
I mean, you see that in baseball all the time with balls and strikes and calls at the plate. That's why baseball implemented some kind of instant replay. But with football, it's an hour-long game. It's an hour and a half long game. Well, I guess, how long's halftime? Like 15 minutes? So it's an hour and 15-minute game that takes 4 hours to play.
Yeah.
And if you're ever at an actual live football game, you're watching a lot of downtime more than you're actual watching games.
Yeah.
I mean, at least commercials can kind of entertain you. I'm sure a lot of you, if you're listening to the show, you've gone to a live football game, and you'll see one play happen, and then all of a sudden, everyone's just standing around, and you don't know what's going on, and everyone's talking, oh, it's a media timeout. And it's like, man, we just saw one play, and then all of a sudden there's another timeout. It is the pace of play. I mean, a lot of people like to watch football because of the fact, especially the way the game is now, it's offense.
Yeah.
You don't want to slow that down any more than you don't want to make these games 5 hours long.
And my whole thing with pass interference and some of these rules there is a little bit gamesmanship and a little bit of hey, let that go, because the reality is that if you're a lineman, you could call holding on an offensive lineman a lot. I played offensive line. You can call holding
happens
all the time.
All the time. Every play, some kind of holding happens.
If you want to talk about hands back and forth with receivers and cornerbacks, I don't want it to come to there's some guy in New York and there's just a little bit of hands back and forth with a wide receiver and a DB, and then it ends up being that's a penalty because someone in New York was like, well, yeah, that's technically pass interference. When if you're a ref on the side of the field, you're going to call pass interference if it's gross, just misconduct,
a blatant one like we just saw against the Saints
and I think what people get really upset about when it comes to this is that they look at this and they're like, how did someone miss that? This isn't one of these DBs was holding the arm and they couldn't see it from one angle. The guy hit him in the head before the ball was even there. And out of everyone on that field, how is there not a ref that threw that? Now, I don't know if maybe the line judge on that side has to be the one that calls that penalty. Maybe that's he just didn't see.
I think any ref can throw the flag, right? But then it's up to the head judge to whether the head judge saw it or not, right? I'm not entirely too sure on the NFL rule book, but I saw the second that happened, I'm like, that's going to be the story of the game. That's going to be the story. You're going to hear it all day on Sports Talk Radio, and guess what? From Clay Travis to Dan Patrick to Colin Cowherd, that's all I heard everyone talking about was that non-PI call. That was and you know what sucks about it too? It's going to carry into the Super Bowl next week. A lot of people are going to be talking about it because here with the Super Bowl we got 2 weeks. Well, now we got a week and a couple days before the game, and we're going to run out of things to talk about. And that PI call is going to come up, and a lot of the Rams are going to be asked about it, including the kid. I can't remember what his name was, including the kid who was on the play, who may be getting fined now. He may be getting a $25,000 fine because the NFL is going to go back and review that helmet to helmet, and if they think it is, he's going to get fined with that. So that's going to go back in the news cycle, and guess what? We're going to start talking about the PI call again.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the Saints and Sean Payton himself did not manage their emotions after that play, and that's why they lost. The interception didn't help. There were play calls that weren't great. I mean, someone earlier from another show that I've listened to said that, part of the issue they thought was that, the Saints didn't run it at the end of the game. Now, that could have just been, they were taking away the run. They were just really trying to take the Rams were. And, I mean, I would too. The Saints were running it all year.
The running game is so dynamic with Ingram and Kamara. Kamara had more passing yards in that game than rushing yards. Yeah. I mean, that's the way you got to play against the Rams. You got to air the ball out a lot because you got to try to keep up with them.
Which makes this game coming up interesting.
But Saints, you had the chance. You got the ball to start overtime. Yeah. You had the chance, and you didn't punch it in.
Got to feel bad for that team. The last 2 years has lost in the most interesting, ridiculous way.
The Minnesota Miracle and now the non-PI call, and it's like, look, I love Drew Brees. I think he's the top 5 quarterback of all time. A lot of people have argued with me on that. I want to see him get one more Super Bowl. He's got a Super Bowl. But like you said, man, that's just heartbreaking for Saints fans.
You talk about an organization that's well run. I mean, you talk about the Saints just from front office ownership down. They're up there with the Steelers, with some of these other great.
They're like one of the most well-respected families in that city in all of football. So we'll transition to the AFC Championship game because they had a little controversy itself, but it was more about overtime and the fact that the Chiefs didn't get a chance to get the ball. So now a lot of people are talking about the overtime rules. I've always been in the boat that we do it the way we do it in college. Why can't we do it that way in the pros? I mean, even if you start on the 20 or the 25, remember, there's a lot of I'm a fan of the Ravens, one of the best red zone defenses in the NFL. Even though if you start on the 20 pro football or college, you're not always going to punch it in.
Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to the AFC Championship in itself, I think a lot of people just didn't want to see that game end because it was a really good game.
That was a really fun game.
And that combined with one of the league's up-and-coming stars that's going to be that way for the next decade, Patrick Mahomes not getting the ball back.
Probably the MVP.
One of the most hated teams, Patriots, winning it that way.
A chance to watch the Brady dynasty go down and then the Mahomes era start.
Yeah.
Early in the season, my MVP vote was for Drew Brees. I think it is going to be Patrick Mahomes. But continue on what you're saying.
I mean,
we don't have to get into that.
I am a fan of, it would be nice that it would have been tit for tat. Patriots get the ball, and whether it started at the 25 or just doing a kickoff, and, the Chiefs would have had to march all the way down the field to score. I think it's just weird when you're like, well, if they kick a field goal, then the other team can respond. And there's just weird rules when it comes to that. I do think to a certain extent you need to start doing something where, if you're going to make it to overtime, there does need to be a fairness across the board. I think just because of a coin flip and someone getting the ball first, them winning isn't always the best.
Well, I mean, the Chiefs would have won that game. They had that interception, and the D Ford was offsides. Not just offsides, he was lined up in the neutral zone.
Yeah.
That wasn't just a jump. That was he lined up in the wrong. And D Ford, one of the best pass rushers in the game. You got to feel for the guy, but he's going to get paid because I believe he's a free agent after this year, and the Chiefs should bring him back. But I would have liked to see Mahomes get a chance there because the way the Chiefs were driving in that game, it's not like the Patriots were playing the best defense.
Yeah, and I think it would have been cool at the end of it. Is Andy Reid going to go for 2? Yeah. Would he have gone for 2? He's the kind of guy that would.
I think college overtime the college football overtime is awesome.
Yeah. I love watching. One of the best games I ever watched, I think it was LSU versus LSU versus Texas A&M. And I think it went 6 or 7 overtimes. This was rivalry game weekend.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, the game that finished 74-71.
That was a great. I stayed and watched the whole thing with my family. We were having a few beverages. It was a great time. And
always a few adult beverages when we're watching sporting events.
Just a few.
Yeah, just a few. Wink,
wink. Side note on the Chiefs, though, they did fire their defense coordinator.
That's the problem with the Chiefs this year. They didn't for as great as their offense was, their defense was abysmal this year. Their defense, losing Marcus Peters was huge. Their defense was just terrible this year.
I did also kind of want to see the Chiefs and the Rams because the best regular season game this year was Chiefs versus Rams Monday night.
The game that everyone said is the new evolution of football.
I don't buy that.
I don't either because as high scoring as that game was, the average scores in the NFL this year were around 26 points.
Yeah.
We had a lot of 26-20 type games.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, I don't know if it's the next evolution of football, but I think it's the next couple stars in football between Jared Goff and Todd Gurley and Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. I think, we're seeing that next era, that next crop of superstars come up in the NFL.
And I do think you're seeing some of these elements of just, slinging around a little bit more.
More gunslingers. Yeah, because Mahomes has got Farvey in him too, man. He's a gunslinger himself.
But you watch, and we talk about these spread offenses in the college going to the NFL, to a certain extent, you're going to see more of that because, like, some of these people are like, oh, yeah, we can work this into, like, the NFL game.
Guys like Baker and Lamar Jackson.
But look at when
the run pass option.
Yeah, but look when the Rams played the Cowboys. The Rams won that game off of a running game and running play action.
Yeah, and that's the thing about December, January football. You run the football. Yeah. You can still run the football. I mean, look at the Cowboys' one playoff win. It was because of Zeke. Zeke went for like 130 in that game. Even Dak Prescott had like 100 yards rushing on the ground. You can still get by in this league by running the football and playing great defense. The Ravens showed that this season, and they made the playoffs. And they were like a touchdown away from forcing overtime with the Chargers in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But we are seeing that next great crop of superstars coming to the NFL. But guess what? The old guys are still showing they can get it done, and that's Brady, and that's Gronk, and that's Julian Edelman, and that's the Patriots, man. They are back in the Super Bowl for a third straight year. I mean, they're not going anywhere. They're not. It's death taxes and Brady and Belichick in January. I know a lot of people are sick and tired. And I even said when the championship matchups were set, the Super Bowl I want to see is the Chiefs and the Saints. The Super Bowl I wouldn't mind is the Chiefs and the Rams. What we're going to get is probably the Patriots and the Rams. The Super Bowl a lot of people really weren't looking forward to, but we got it. I mean, it's just a lot of people hate on Brady's greatness. And I was one of them. I've turned a corner on now. The guy's just he's a surgeon, and even the passer showed it. Going back to talking about running the football, Sony Michel. I mean, Sony Michel ran all over the Chiefs in that game.
Yeah.
10-yard run after 10-yard run after 10-yard run.
He's been a blessing. Him and James White in the backfield has certainly been something I think.
James White won my fantasy league this year.
That
one of my best pickups.
Double teams right there. Between those two, that duo is really good this year. And I think even the Patriots would say that they didn't expect for it to be that well.
I didn't think they expected James White to do anything this year. I think they just brought him back for depth. Because they had like 6 running backs on the roster to start it off with, including they brought in Rex Burkhead because I think they thought, well, James White, Sony Michel's rookie, James White's probably washed up, and all White did was like he was more of a receiver this year, but he was still just running all over the place.
And a lot of people talk about how the Patriots evaluate talent. And it's not just when it comes to their starters. Like, when you look at the Patriots use a lot of players, a ton of players on the field.
Yeah.
And I think the part of that is because they, Belichick has people on that roster who he trusts.
Yeah, and the coaches on his staff that he trusts. Yeah. He's got some coaches on his staff that have been there 15, 16 years. Continuity is big in the NFL. And I saw something too, like the Patriots implemented 8 new plays on offense just the night before the game. And they used them during the game, and they ran to perfection. That speaks to the continuity of the coaching staff and the trust they have on that team. And here's what the Pats do. They bring in role players, guys that aren't typically stars, because they're never drafting in the top 10.
Yeah.
They're always drafting in the bottom of the first round, and half the time they just trade out that first-round pick to just get more picks in the second and the third round. And they're bringing in role players, and they're turning them into superstars in the systems that they've built for these guys. The Kyle Van Noys, the Julian Edelmans, the Chris Hogans, the Hightowers, the Butlers of the world,
Yeah, and I think it's crazy, too. You talk about Josh Gordon, who was with the team for just a couple weeks, and I think everyone at the time was like, the Patriots don't have a deep threat. They don't have someone that can just go get a ball downfield if Brady chunks it. And, Gordon has, leads the team, having to go through his own stuff right now. And I think a lot of people were like, well, that's going to really hurt them in the playoffs. The fact that it hasn't speaks a lot to that. And, I think also when you have an offensive coordinator, McDaniels, who's been there for a while, there's just trust across the board, I think that speaks to why they've been able to overcome some of this stuff for sure.
All right, I'm just checking out the systems here a little bit. I can have you on next week if you want. If not, your Super Bowl prediction right off the bat. What are you thinking?
I would definitely love to come on next week, but I will say...
No, I can bring you on next week. I'm going to probably have someone else on, too. I mean, we can get a little threesome on the show.
I'm down. I'm down.
Well, off the bat, Super Bowl prediction. What are you thinking? We'll get more detailed next week, but off the bat, what do you think?
I'm going to go with Rams.
You going Rams?
I'm going Rams.
Think the Pats lose back-to-back Super Bowls?
I think that defensive front for the Rams is going to cause fits across the board, and I think the Rams defense is not talked about as much because of who their head coach is and who their running back is and who their quarterback is. I mean, the one team that from the get-go, everyone's saying, they're probably have a great chance, of likelihood of winning the Super Bowls with the Rams. And I think that also that would be the best thing, I think, for the NFL is if the Rams win.
Well, the Rams, they spent an ungodly amount of money in free agency in the offseason. And it showed. I mean, they were the best put-together roster in the offseason. I want to go Rams. I just don't think Brady and Belichick are going to lose back-to-back Super Bowls. Like, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Belichick's biggest thing is that he takes away, and coaches across, and a lot of people say, Belichick takes away part of his people's game. He takes away what you're good at. Well, that's part of football, is that you're going to take away and give up something. It's just at the end of the day, when Belichick gives up part of an offense to do well, it's the part that's like the teams I don't think are the most consistent on, and I think that's what's going to come down to. Can they consistently affect the run game of the Rams? If they can do that, then they're going to have issues because, I don't.
Well, if you look at the run game with the Rams, their player on fire right now is C.J. Anderson. Yeah. The guy was unemployed like midway through, like most of the season. The guy was unemployed. Yeah. I mean, you look at the last few games in the playoffs. It's not even Todd Gurley. It's C.J. Anderson. Yeah. So.
I mean, last week Todd Gurley had a terrible game. Until the end, he had like one play that.
But C.J. picked it up and had I think 120 on the ground in that game. And that's what Belichick does. He takes away your best player. He takes away your best asset of your game. Now, is he going to try to take away Todd Gurley and they go through the air with Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins?
I mean and that's what I think it comes down to is I think the Rams have a great chance of winning because of what they have in that team and just they have I think the most complete team in the NFL right now. Just from defense to offense, from start to finish, they do. It's going to have to come down to Goff and McVay and how the play calling compares to Belichick's and how Goff's play compares to what Brady's will be, which is great. I mean, I think Brady last year didn't have his best Super Bowl, but it was still a good performance. It was still a great performance. So like, it's just going to have to come down to that. But just talent wise, fresh faces, youth aside, the Rams are the better team.
I think we're gonna get a shootout. I really do. We'll do scores and we'll do more predictions next week.
It's gonna be 14-21. That's what it's gonna be.
14-21 shootout. 21-14 shootout. It'll be 17-10. No, watch. We're gonna predict this big shootout, this massive game, and it's gonna finish 6-3.
Army Navy triple option the whole time.
So, anyways, we'll talk more Super Bowl next week. We'll we got only a couple minutes left. We'll talk about, we were talking about dominant players and at positions. Man, there's no one more dominant right now than James Harden.
Yeah.
61 points the other night.
Tied Kobe's record in the Garden.
55 the other night. 55 last week. The guy is just on fire right now, and he's single-handedly putting the Rockets, a team that had championship aspirations at the beginning of the season, on his back and making them relevant.
And he's having to.
Chris Paul's been hurt. Carmelo didn't work out. Capella's been hurt.
Yeah, and this is just a reality, is that if this is how it's going to be for the whole season, they could get bounced in the first round of the playoffs.
Oh, because I think right now they're only holding on to the fifth seed.
Yeah, and you can win and lose any day in the NBA. I mean, it's not like you're the worst team in the NBA still has a chance to beat Golden State any day just because of it happens. Like, that's just how basketball happens. How regular season happens. You're going to have bad teams beat good teams, but you look at these games that Rockets are playing day in and day out, and with those good teams, they're going to win a majority of the games, but you drop some. When you look at the Rockets, they're winning games, but they're also losing games and Harden scoring that many points. It's because they don't have someone like a facilitator like Chris Paul, because they are, have some people that are out, because they did, bank on having Anthony play a role that he just wasn't able to play, and so they're going to have to get Chris Paul back, and once they get these players back, it's going to be a second for them to get in the thing. But if Harden can consistently do what he's doing in the playoffs in there, and they can find a way to keep his scoring up and also get some of these players coming back, more involved in the offense, and get Chris Paul in there who can create looks for people, then they have a chance.
I was a huge Chris Paul fan, but I think Father Time is starting to show on him a little bit.
You think with Harden, though, we could look in, how old is he?
Harden 28?
Yeah.
28, I think.
You think 5 years from now we could be talking about he's maybe one of the top 15,
Harden,
20 players of the NBA?
I can't remember. Was
like
Harden one of the last Sonics picks, or was that Westbrook? Because I know that, like, the year Durant was with the Sonics, he had either Westbrook or Harden. I can't remember which one it was.
I do know that when his big first year in OKC, he was coming off the bench, wasn't he? He was like sixth man of the year.
Well, can you imagine, man, like with Durant? I mean, at one point, that's a big three right there. At one point, the Thunder had Westbrook, Durant, and Harden.
Well, the biggest issue with them
was
that
this Westbrook. Well, no one can play with Russell Westbrook. I love Russell Westbrook's game. He just seems like a terrible teammate. Nobody can play with the guy. And you know what? I'm going to say that with Carmelo, too. The Rockets are the walking wounded right now, and they're having all these issues, and they have one of the greatest scorers of all time on their bench, and he didn't work out with them. That's showing me what I need to know about Carmelo Anthony right now.
Though, even with the Knicks, wasn't working out.
Like, that was a disaster with the Knicks. I mean, that was a Phil move.
Yeah, I mean, Carmelo Anthony is someone that, you know, if you're a fan and you want to go watch a basketball game, you want Carmelo Anthony on the floor. If you're a team and you want to win a championship, it's hard to. It's hard to. Because his game is the most least transitional to the ladder of their career in the way in which he plays, shoots, things like that. I mean, I think that's what's really hurt Melo down the stretch. I mean, I wish him all the best going to Chicago, but, you know, I mean.
Well, he's not going to play a game with the Bulls. Apparently the rumor is he's going to pass waivers, and then it looks like he's probably going to be a Laker.
Yeah. I mean, look, and to be honest with you, dang, that could be actually something that could work.
Just because, you know, him and LeBron are boys, and the Lakers, they're probably going to be a playoff team. LeBron at least made them a playoff team.
I think it depends on if LeBron comes back. If LeBron keeps getting hurt.
I think LeBron's going to be back like next week, they're saying.
What do you think is going to happen with Walton?
I mean, he got the dreaded vote of confidence from ownership just a couple days ago. The thing with Luke Walton is if LeBron wants him there, he's there. If LeBron doesn't want him there, he's gone.
The thing with Luke Walton is even if he gets fired, I mean, some team would be lucky to have him as a coach. I mean, you look at a guy, you know, and I do think
he stepped in for Steve Kerr.
Yeah, he did, and I will be the first one to say that for a young head coach taking on Kuzma, Ball, Ingram, like those aren't the three best. I feel like, you know, those are. I mean, talk about a whole team being young, and then you throw a superstar and a bunch of random vets. You talk about Lance Steven, Rajon Rondo,
you're talking about
Wallace,
polarizing personalities.
Yeah,
you're talking about. At any moment, that locker room could erupt with how much ego and personality is in there.
And the fact that we haven't heard a ton of stuff come out of that locker room is a good job for them.
The great Chuck Daly always talked about, to be a coach in the NBA, you don't necessarily have to be the best X's and O's guy. You just have to know how to
manage people,
manage personalities, and manage egos.
The best coaches.
That's how he did it in Detroit. When he had, He had Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, like John Sally, you know.
Talk about, if I could play for any NBA team, I think the Pistons, you know, back in the day with Laimbeer.
The Bad Boys?
Yeah.
No, that's one of my favorite documentaries is The Bad Boys.
Oh, my gosh, that 30-30?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll make a 30-for-30 about us.
About the fastest growing sports talk show on the campus of ODU. Yeah. What if I told you there was a fast growing sports talk show of two guys who just drink beer and watch sports?
Yeah, I think that's why we all got into this.
Yeah. So, we got to wrap it up here. We only got a couple minutes left. Anything else you want to get off your chest? It's your first time on the show. Anything going on in the sporting world right now that's catching your eye? I know.
From a personal standpoint, the University of South Carolina Gamecocks
beat
Auburn Tigers last.
Nick's from South Carolina, and he is a big Gamecock
fan. Yeah, I'm a huge Gamecocks fan. They're not that great of a team this year, but they do have 2 wins over top 25 opponents. They got Oklahoma State this weekend and Tennessee, who's ranked number 1 on Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to watching that.
Tennessee, they had to battle off Vanderbilt last night.
Yeah.
But what was that kid Grant Williams, 20 for 23 at the free throw line?
Yeah.
40-some points.
Yeah. College basketball is starting to heat up, and a lot of people give shade to the regular season of college basketball. If you're a fan of basketball, start watching some of these games in college basketball.
Well, this is the time of the year, with football winding down. This is where, some of the best games in college. But, I'm a college basketball junkie. I watch it from the onset.
Oh, we forgot to mention something this weekend. Pro Bowl.
Oh yeah, I forgot to preview the Pro Bowl. Oh yeah, the game that nobody cares about. Well, I'll go AFC 53, NFC 49.
You want me to get this off my chest? I'll get this off my chest. The fact that they moved the Pro Bowl for Hawaii is a disservice to the players that make it and the fans that watch it.
Well, that's why like a lot of guys don't go to the Pro Bowl anymore because guys went to the Pro Bowl only so they could get that free trip to Hawaii.
Yeah.
I will say one of the greatest innovations lately of the Pro Bowl is the skills competition. That's been a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, it was fun last year. Seeing a dodgeball competition.
They did a dodgeball competition. It was cool with the drone where the receivers had to catch the balls as it dropped out from the drone. That was pretty cool. But yeah, what's your Pro Bowl prediction? I'll go AFC 53, NFC 49. Andrew Luck throws 7 touchdowns.
I'll just go that. I mean, it sounds great. Like it's Pro Bowl. I mean, I'm not gonna
sit here and talk about how we're gonna fix the Pro Bowl.
I'd be more interested in the NHL All-Star game, which I think is
this
coming
weekend
up.
also.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tune into both for like maybe 5 or 10
What's your
minutes.
favorite All-Star game out of
It's
all
the baseball
professionals?
All-Star
Baseball,
game. It's the
yeah,
baseball
baseball's
All-Star
best.
game. It's the best one. It is the absolute. The NBA All-Star game can be fun to watch if you like to watch a lot of like 3 points and dunks.
Yeah. Well, what I also love about the
But
NBA,
hands down, it's Major League Baseball All-Star
the
game.
best part about MLB also is that like that I'm pretty sure it still does. That decides.
No,
Did they stop that?
doing that like 2 seasons ago.
I was about to say they decided who is home field advantage in the playoffs.
But they still play
I
pretty
thought,
hard.
yeah.
They still play pretty hard. And the home run derby is always fun to watch too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
All right, we only got a few seconds left. Man, I told you this hour is flies by, right?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And
all right, yeah, Nick. Well, Nick, everybody, Nick, tell the people how they can follow you.
you can follow me at Boykin803 on Twitter, at Boykin803 on Twitter. You can also catch any stories that I write on WTKR.com. We have a great sports section or staff over there between Adam Winkler and Mitch Brown.
ODU alum Mitch Brown.
ODU
alum Mitch Brown.
Yep. And so check us out there. You'll see some content from me there. I covered the Army-Navy game last
Also, how cool was that covering the Army-Navy?
Army-Navy game was great. If as a sports fan, if you want to see something with such passion that represents not only the country you live in, but also the sport you love, go to the Army-Navy game. It's worth it. It's usually in Philadelphia or Baltimore. It's going to be in New York City coming up here in a few years. So that is one of the best sporting events. Talk about a long game, though. It's literally like and lastly, you get everyone there, and you have both these universities who are exploring everything. So talk about everyone's mom and dad there who go to those 2 academies.
Yeah.
And so literally, after a few plays, they'll bring cheerleaders or the bowling team on the field to honor them. So it's literally like, if anyone's ever watched football, the triple option will make a game go by really quick. This game goes about 4 hours.
Yeah, I was going to say, the game itself did go by pretty quick because I think there was like maybe one pass thrown the entire game. But yeah, the whole pageantry. I love how like they march both schools in before the game. The president switches sides at halftime. Yeah, the Army-Navy game is definitely on my bucket list. Okay, we got to wrap up the show. If you want to follow me, Twitter at Jesse WTKR. Also Instagram Jesse JV News 3. Follow along. We'd love to have you for the ride. We'll be back on next week. Nick will probably be back on. I'll have someone else on as well. Nick will probably be on throughout the semester. And next week, we'll just talk a lot. It'll be a lot of Super Bowl. Hate to watch the football season end, but college basketball season's gonna ramp up. And my favorite time of the year is March Madness. That's right around the corner too.
Hey, that's big for us in general.
Oh yeah,
where we work.
For where we work, definitely.
Yeah.
So everyone, thanks for tuning in for episode 1 of the spring semester. Here's the thing with Jesse Varner. For Nick Boykin, thanks for tuning in. Peace and love. I'm out.
Taking off those headphones is like when you get out the sauna.
Yeah, I just have sweat coming out of my
Yeah, me too.